Hello, JJDL viewers and any other fan or viewer of John Jr. that happened to come across this video. This is Skippy here, coach of the Steel City Surge, coming at you with a draft analysis for Season 3 of the JJDL. I am in the Chien Pao division, which is the Wi-Fi division. So, first ever Wi-Fi division in the JJDL, to my knowledge. Very excited. Thank you to John Jr. for the opportunity to be able to compete in this division and be able to upload my experience throughout this season. I'm very happy for the opportunity. Now, let's get into a little bit about this season and the draft itself. So, the way that we were set up to draft was we had 115 points per team to draft 9 to 11 mons. Typically standard, but we had some caveats in there. We could select up to 3 Terra Captains. Of the total of those Terra Captains, there was specific tax for each of them, depending on how Terra performed for that specific mon. They could not exceed 25 points. And the way that Terra is working in this league for this season, it is free Terra. So what that means is any mon that is a Terra Captain can run any type that they want, including the Stellar type, I believe. However, with that being said, we're going to be running more of a preview format. So prior to each match every week, we're going to essentially say what Terra type we're bringing if we're bringing a Terra Captain. So, for example, if I were to bring my Terra Captain this week, I would have to say what Terra type it would be before we go and search for our opponent in that match. So it's a very fun, different Terra rule that I have not experienced yet, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out through this season. I know John is very on the fence about it, but I'm excited to see how it goes. Now, to get into the actual drafting part and the actual draft analysis, we ended up getting not one of the better picks in the draft. I would say we got a higher tier, but not like one of the best picks. We got pick 14 out of 16 coaches. So right at the bottom of the barrel, kind of, but we should be able to get a good partner for our first round pick in the second round, and so on and so forth. So I was really hoping that we could get something nice and powerful, and in my opinion, I think we did. All right, so to get into the actual draft at the 14th pick, we were hoping to see something good fall to us. And unfortunately, a lot of the real big threats ended up going pretty early, which is to be expected when you're in a 16 team coaches pool. However, I think we did end up snagging a very good first round pick, being Terrapagos. We did allow Terrapagos, as well as a few other mons like Huron Black and Terra Free Terra Latias and mons like that. But Terrapagos, I feel like, is just an all-around great mon. It can do a number of different things. To start off, it's got a great ability in Terra Shell. What Terra Shell is, essentially, the first hit, it's like a multi-scale for a normal type. It does not take much damage at all on its first hit when it's at full HP, which is insanely good. So the one thing you got to keep in mind with that is you don't want to take any damage switching in unless it's going to be something super minimal and something that you could try to recover back with like rest or something, or even leftovers. So keeping that in mind, it's also extremely bulky. It's got 95 HP, 110 in both defense and special defense. That is very tanky for a normal type with an insane move pool of coverage. To go along with its stab Terra Starstorm, it also has Aura Sphere, Thunderbolt, Surf, Ice Beam, Ice Spinner, Flamethrower, Energy Ball, Earth Power, Earthquake, Dazzling Gleam, etc. It's got a multitude of coverage, as what comes normally with a normal type, but it also has some very good offensive prowess. It has 95 attack and 105 special attack. So it's not just gonna chip away little bit by little bit. It's gonna put some damage in you because it's got some really powerful moves in there. It also doesn't have that bad of speed. It's got pretty average speed at 85. So you could feasibly run some speed on it if you would like. We'll have to see if I end up doing that later in the season, but the amount of bulk this thing offers and has is just so good. It also has some really good setup with Double Dance, Calm Mind, and Rock Polish. It it can really tear through some teams if that ends up setting up a decent amount. That with that coverage pool, you might just be able to run Calm Mind and go straight after whatever's in front of you with 3 different moves. This thing is a very much a threat, and it gets some okay support as well. It gets Rapid Spin, which is very, very good. Usually my teams don't end up having all that much hazard control, and we'll see how I deal with that later. But it also gets Stealth Rock as well. So it can do a number of different things. It's a great mod. It only cost me 17 points to select in the first round. I'm very, very happy with the first round selection. And to pair with it, I think it's one of the better mods. I may end up trading it at some point just to see, because I've never gotten to use it either. So what we ended up going with, I'm not sure how it was still on the board, but seeing how everything fell later, it kind of makes sense. We ended up selecting Goldango. I've never gotten to use Goldango. I've never had the opportunity to use it. It's always got snagged up before I can snag it in round 2 whenever I want to get it. It's got an amazing typing with Steel and Ghost, so it kind of pairs well with Terrapagos. It eats up the fighting type moves that it's not too very fond of. And it also has an insane ability in Good as Gold. You probably have seen, if you've seen any Draft League content at some point, you've probably come across a video explaining Good as Gold. I'm not going to run down that route. I'm not going to explain it. It's pretty much self-explanatory at this point. It also has some pretty solid overall stats. 87 HP. It's got 133 special attack, 95 defense, 91 special defense, 84 speed, and a measly 60 attack. I'm probably never going to run it physical. Probably always going to take advantage of that really high special attack stat. And to go along with that too, it has some very solid coverage all around. It's got Thunderbolt, Power Gem, Focus Blast, Dazzling Gleams, Psychic, and Psyshock. It has some very good coverage to go along with some pretty good support as well. It can run screens, Light Screen and Reflect. It can run Thunder Wave, Memento. It can run Trick. And also has some very good setup and recovery with Nasty Plot and Recover, respectively. You can run a number of different sets with this thing. It's very versatile. It's very useful. It's something that like I said, I've always wanted to use it. I've never had a chance to use it. I'm hoping I get to use it at some point this season to really tear through a team, chip away at something, or just be an overall defensive wall. So really excited to use this mon and very happy to see what it can do. Moving into round 3, a lot of good pairings for these two mons ended up getting selected earlier in this round and at the end of the second round as well. So I ended up going with one of the better breaker options, just overall breaker options, in Landeras Incarnate. It has a very solid typing in flying and ground. Yes, it has that quad weakness to ice, but Goldango can eat that up for us very easily, so thankfully we have that option. And it has some very good abilities in Sand Force and Sheer Force. Now, to clarify, I have not seen anything banning Sand Force or anything like that. I'll ask John himself just to clarify to make sure that I can run Sand Force on this thing. And if I can, it's gonna. I might end up running some sand teams. I don't know. We'll have to see. It's got some very good offensive stats to be that kind of breaker mon that we kind of need it to be. If it runs Sheer Force Life Orb, these stats will be taken advantage of. It's got 125 attack, 115 special attack, and a very solid 101 speed. It gives us just a little bit of an edge over those base 100 speed mons and any base 90 speed. So they would have to run Scarf essentially to outspeed us, which is amazing info to have. And it also has some solid bulk as well with 89 HP, 90 defense, and 80 special defense. The amount of coverage this thing has is very, very solid. It gets Brick Break for screen breaking and just a very good physical fighting move that's not Focus Blast, or Focus Miss, I like to call it. I know a lot of people like to call it that. I just always call it Focus Miss. It also gets Sludge Bomb and Sludge Wave, Psychic, Outrage, Grass Knot, Stone Edge. It gets some very good coverage, and it has some very solid setup as well. It can run Nasty Plot, Calm Mind, Bulk Up, Swords Dance. It can run any of those options. It's very versatile in that setup department, which makes it a really great breaker as well, combining with a very solid typing and ground and flying. And also gets some very good momentum and support. It gets U-Turn, it gets Taunt, it gets Stealth Rocks. You can't go wrong with any of those 3 moves at any point. This thing is going to do a lot for us, I feel like. I've also never had a real good chance to use this mon before, and I'm excited to see what it can do as well. Now, in the 4th round, I kind of wanted to check a couple of other boxes off in terms of overall typings I wanted to use. And this one checked off two of the two different types that I wanted to end up using, that being water and dark. And you guessed it, we're using Hammerot or Samurott Hisui. It has a very good ability in sharpness. It boosts those cutting moves and just increases its overall damage output to combine with some very good offensive stats as well, with 108 attack and 100 special attack. Probably won't run it special as often just because sharpness does kind of increase the physical cutting moves, but we'll see at some point if that ends up being the case. It also has some very solid speed. It's essentially the same as Terrapagos at that point. It's got 85 base speed, so kind of overlapping there, but I mean, it offers a lot with it's a signature move, Ceaseless Edge, so we can set up some spikes. And that way, Goldango can kind of block that. So they kind of pair together pretty well. Then it also has some decently okay defensive stats with 90 HP, 80 defense, and 65 special defense. It's more okay on the physical side as opposed to the special side, but we can run Assault Vest on it if we would like, just to get that extra special bulk on it. And its typing should allow us to kind of absorb some hits every so often if we need to. It also has some very good coverage with Drill Run, Sacred Sword, Brick Break, Mega Horn, Grass Knot, Ice Beam, Air Slash. It's got a lot of good coverage, some on the special side more than the physical side, but again, we'll see how that ends up turning out for us. It has some very, very good priority selections with Sucker Punch, Aqua Jet, Upper Hand, Vacuum Wave. It can do a number of different things for us. We're very much looking forward to that. It also gets some okay setup with Swords Dance. Not sure how often we'll run that. It might just end up being like a cleaner or a lead setup kind of thing. We'll see. But it also gets some very good support, having taunt access as well as encore, and even has access to flip turns, so we can use that for momentum purposes. Very much looking forward to seeing this mon in action, and combined with the other three, I think we have a very decent enough core where we can make things happen. Now, with our next pick, we decided to go with a Terra Captain finally. And this is one that I think is more of a stronger Terra Captain than the point value gives it, because Azelf is a 12-point mon, but it costs 13 for a Terra Captain. And holy heck, is this thing offensive. It's got a great ability in Levitate, so we have another ground immunity, which is kind of nice. Kind of not necessary as much with Landeras, but it helps all the same just to have that extra viability for Goldango to switch out whenever it needs to. And having the option of open Terra with Azelf allows us to run it somewhat more defensive, because it has okay defensive stats with 75 HP, 70 defense, and 70 special defense. But we can also run it very heavily offensive. It has 115 speed, which is pretty good. And then it also has 125 in both attack and special attack. So it can run physical, it can run special with Terra Any and Terra Blast. That can be a very deadly combo. It's a very much mixed attacker, and it also has some pretty good support moves to go along with it. It gets Baton Pass for a very fast switch out. It gets Encore, both screens, Stealth Rock, Taunt, Thunder Wave. It also gets Trick. Being a Psychic type really allows it to have some very good support moves. But it also has some very good setup, too. It gets access to Calm Mind, Nasty Plot, and a very good move in Mystical Power, where if it hits, it has that opportunity to raise the special attack of the user, which is very good for setup. And it's also a stab move for it at like just being a psychic move. So very good stab move with potential for setup. It's a great combination there. And then it also has a very, very diverse move pool to go off of that as well. It gets access to Acrobatics, Dazzling Gleam, Drain Punch, Energy Ball, Explosion, Flamethrower, Grass Knot, Ice Punch, Iron Tail, Knockoff, Shadow Ball, Thunderbolt, U-Turn. It gets access to a number of different moves to go along with that. So having that option is very, very nice for Terra Captain, and I'm very excited to see what kind of things we can get it to do for us this season. Now, going to our next mon, we decided to go back-to-back Terra Captains. We decided to go with Kilowattrel as our second Terra Captain. I think it can be a very good offensive threat to pair with Azelf as the other offensive threat. This thing with an amazing ability set in Volt Absorb, Competitive, and even Wind Power for some little bit of Tailwind shenanigans or even some wind-based move shenanigans. It can be very useful for us. And combine that with its very good offensive stats and 125 speed with 105 special attack and its somewhat okay 70 attack. It can do a lot of chip damage and potentially even knock stuff out outright, depending if we try to go specs, because that speed stat makes it outspeed a ton of mons, some even with Scarf. So we could very feasibly run choice specs on a lot of different builds with this thing. Combine that as well, it's got decently meager defensive stats, so maybe we don't run it as defensive as often. It does have 70 HP, 60 in both defenses, so it could potentially run some defensive sets, but probably not as much. It's probably going to look to try to break through a bunch of different teams with that higher special attack with choice specs or something along those lines. Um, it also has okay support with Thunderwave and Tailwind, and has a pretty decent move pool. Nothing too great. It gets mainly stab moves, Terra Blast, U-turn, and for some reason it gets Weather Ball as well. So that's probably a little niche move set, depending on if we're coming up against like a weather-based team or something, just to have that as some extra damage that's not a stab move or its Terra move. So it has some very good viability options. I've seen this thing go absolutely ham in other leagues. It was the kill leader for the majority of the one season I was in recently. So I can see it being very much a threat in certain scenarios. It just depends on how it's used. I'm hoping I can use it in a very good way where it doesn't become lackluster. So we'll see how it turns out. I'm very excited to use it though. Now, getting to round 7 and beyond that, I was kind of just picking at scraps mainly for the most part. There wasn't like a whole lot of great options left on the board. I really wanted to get myself a grounded poison type, and the one that I really wanted was Dragalge to be like that kind of grounded poison with the dragon typing, and it was snagged like 2 picks before me, and I was just so annoyed at that. It was just a really tough time. I ended up selecting Rev Room, and with Rev Room, you kind of get a little bit of good things here and there, but you kind of also don't. So it's got a really good and really interesting typing in Steel and Poison. It also has some pretty decent abilities in Overcoat and Filter, as well as some pretty good offensive stats with 119 physical attack, 90 base speed, and a very measly 54 in special attack. But it also has some pretty decent defenses, at least on the physical side, with 80 HP, 90 defense, and then 67 special defense. So it can be a pretty good physical mon with some speed. It does have some very good setup in both Curse and Shift Gear. We'll probably end up running more Shift Gear, but if we wanted to run something with Trick Room or something like that, we could easily go into a Curse set and try to set up that way. But it also has some very good support moves with Parting Shot, Haze, Taunt, Toxic Spikes, Toxic, as well as a decently okay move pool in terms of just coverage. It has high horsepower, Lash Out, it got Temper Flare, Zen Headbutt, and it also has Bulldoze in case we do need to run some speed control. So it's an okay mon. It's a very solid grounded poison type. It can be very dangerous in certain scenarios, but the fact that we're not tearing it, it kind of feels a little bit lackluster. But we'll see how it ends up turning out this season. I'm excited to see what it can do and how we could use it. Now, going to round 8, and we're kind of running a little bit low on points at this point, so I thought about some different combinations of things just to get to 9 mons, maybe try to stretch it out to 10 or 11, but this mon fell to us in round 8, and I felt like I just couldn't really pass it up because it has a very good ability with Magic Bounce, and that would be Hatterene. It also fills out the a couple more of the types I was looking to fill out with Fairy and Psychic. I, at this point, had not selected Fairy type at all, and I really was trying to pick at the bare minimum for Fairy types at that point. So that's on me, but all things considered, I think Hatterene is a great type of mon to have with this team with Magic Bounce. It has some very good defensive stats with 57 HP, pretty low, but it makes that up with its defenses with 95 defense and 103 special defense. And then it has some pretty good offensive stats with 90 attack and 136 special attack with a very low speed stat at 29 speed. So probably the slowest mon on this team, but also can hit very hard and has some excellent support options to go along with it. It gets Baton Pass, so we can do a slow pivot out. And it also has Healing Wish, which is pretty nice. Kind of stinks that it's very slow and has Healing Wish, but I mean, we can work around that. It also gets both screens. It gets Nuzzle, Thunderwave, Trick Room, and even Skill Swap if we wanted to throw out, like, I don't know, Healer or Anticipation, or if we wanted to get rid of Magic Bounce for some reason, we certainly could do that. Especially if there's a better ability on the other side that we kind of just want to get rid of from a mon, like Regenerator or something. But, I mean, it's a scenario-based thing. It's a niche thing, so probably not going to happen all that often. It also has some pretty okay setup with Calm Mind and Psych Up. Psych Up being the ability to just snag uh, opposing stat boosts and such. And it also has a decent move pool in Dark Pulse, Giga Drain, Mystical Fire, Shadow Ball, so it has some pretty good coverage, as well as its stab moves. And its stab moves are pretty good. I would say this is a very solid defensive mon that we can try at some point in the season, see if we can snag a Dragon type to make that Dragon Fairy Steel Core, but we'll have to see at some point. I'm excited to use it though. I haven't gotten to use it a whole lot in the past, so I'm excited to see what we can make it do this season. And coming up to round 9, at this point we were, I mean, kind of really low on points, to the point where I was debating going with one thing or the other, and I actually ended up going with a 9-point mon to round out our team. And sorry, not really sorry, John, kind of sniped him pretty hard with this one, and he never really recovered, but I ended up selecting Tox Apex with this last pick. And this was kind of just like, I needed another defensive mon. It's got some really good defensive stats with 50 HP. Not great, but the defensive stats make up for it again, with 152 defense and 142 special defense. And I'm not even going to get into the meager offensive stats that it has. It's very, very low. It's never really going to sweep people. But it has a very good typing with Water and Poison, with that great ability of Regenerator. Never really going to run anything other than Regenerator. And if I do, it's going to be some real fire, heat in the kitchen kind of build. We'll have to see how that turns out at some point. It does get some pretty good support options as well with Haze, Toxic Spikes. It gets Icy Wind in case we need to run some speed control. And it has a pretty okay move pool outside of its stab types with Ice Beam, Ice Spinner, Lunge, Mudshot, Smackdown. And it has some okay setup as well with Baneful Bunker to try to get physical Pokemon to be poisoned so it can run something like Hex. And also has Iron Defense to try to boost those physical defenses even higher, trying to prevent a potential physical mon sweep from the other side. So I'm excited to use Tox Apex. I actually haven't really used it that much either. A lot of the ones that I picked this season ended up not being a whole lot of options that I've used before, so I'm excited to see what I can do with them. And that was the team. Essentially, don't really get too attached to a lot of these mons. There are changes that are possible. I'm already looking into a potential trade and other potential moves to see if we can increase this team and make it better than it currently is. I mean, that's the case with every draft season. You're trying to make the best team possible. And while I really like this team, I think it could be a lot better. So I'm trying to explore and see what changes could potentially be made. I'm not going to jump right into anything right away, but there are some potential moves that I could make, and I do have some options. And I'll give you guys updates whenever that does happen, whenever I do team builders before matches and such. So be on the lookout for potential moves, and don't get too attached to any of the mons really, outside of like Terrapagos, maybe Landeras, or Samurott Hisui. Just try to, yeah, be aware of potential moves. I do have 5 free agent moves that I can use throughout the season, and coaches trades are unlimited up through, I believe, week 5 is the cutoff. So just keep an eye out for that. If you do see anything in the team builder, I will let you guys know every week in case of those moves. So thank you all for watching. Join back throughout the season. We have 8 full weeks of matches lined up over the next 2 months or so, not to mention playoffs coming after that. Hopefully we can make the top cut for playoffs and extend the season a little bit longer. Very much looking forward to this opportunity. Thank you again to John Jr. for this opportunity. Very much looking forward to it, and I'm excited to see how this season goes. Thank you all. Take care.